I paid for my girlfriend's university, then she left me a letter saying the spark is gone, and ran away with her professor. Years later showed up with his child, begging to return. I suppose that like many people who end up telling everything on a forum, my life took an unexpected and painful turn. I'm not a special guy, just another one trying to get ahead. I'm almost 30 years old, and for a long time my world revolved around her. We had been together since we met at a part-time job, while we were both trying to figure out what to do with our lives after finishing school. We were young with more dreams than money, and with our backpacks loaded with the difficulties we had seen in our families, where economic stability was a pipe dream. Our parents, despite their efforts, always struggled to make ends meet, and we grew up with the firm determination to build something different, something solid and safe for ourselves. Our relationship was built on that foundation of mutual understanding and the shared desire to progress. We understood each other. We knew what it meant to live with uncertainty, with a lack of resources. That is why, when we started living together in a small apartment, every penny counted, every financial decision was crucial. We were not planning on getting married right away. First, we needed to be in a stronger economic position. We wanted to avoid starting a marriage with the same pressures we had seen drown our parents. I got a job in the construction industry. I started from the bottom, of course, but it was a job that paid relatively well for someone without a university degree. It was hard, long hours, often in difficult conditions, but I put my heart into it. I saw the potential to grow, to learn a trade that would always be in demand. Meanwhile, she worked part-time and explored her university options. I always knew she had a passion for history, for ancient civilizations, for unearthing the past. She dreamed of being an archaeologist, of traveling to faraway places, of making important discoveries. I listened to her, fascinated by her enthusiasm. Although to me that world seemed like something out of movies, but seeing her so passionate about something, that made me want to support her with everything I had. It was one day, after receiving my first big raise and a bonus for a job well done, that I made a decision. A decision that came from the depths of my love for her and my desire to see her happy and fulfilled. I knew that university, especially a specialized career like archaeology, was expensive, more expensive than we could afford with our income at that time. But I had this new job, this opportunity to earn good money. I proposed something to her that left her speechless. I told her that I would take care of paying her university tuition, her books, her essential expenses, so that she could dedicate herself to studying full-time or almost full-time, and that her part-time job would be just for her extras or personal savings. I wanted to take that financial burden off her so she could pursue her dream without the constant pressure of money. My girlfriend's reaction was one of total surprise and immense gratitude. She cried. She hugged me tightly. She thanked me over and over again. She told me I was the best man in the world, that no one had ever done something like that for her. Seeing her happiness, knowing that I could be the key for her to pursue her passion, filled me with a satisfaction that money alone could never buy. I felt that we were more united than ever, a true team working for a better future, a future where we could both achieve our dreams. Our life took on a different rhythm. I worked long hours, often returning home exhausted long after sunset. The bills, the rent, the food, now the university tuition, everything fell mainly on my shoulders. She, for her part, immersed herself in her studies and continued with her part-time job, which gave her some independence and helped her with her personal expenses. Despite the long hours of work, I was happy. I saw her progress. I listened to her talk with enthusiasm about her classes, about what she was learning. I felt that my effort had a tangible purpose, that I was investing in our future. A few months later, she got a much better job related to her field. She became a research assistant for a professor at the university. This job not only gave her more money, but it also offered her invaluable experience in archaeology and gave her more flexibility with her study schedules. We celebrated this achievement together. It meant one more step towards her dream and a small relief from the financial burden, although I was still the main provider. However, with this new job and the intensity of her studies, I noticed that something began to change between us. It was not overnight, but a gradual distancing. We spent less time together, of course, due to my long work hours and her studies, and now her research. The nights at home often found me exhausted on the couch, while she was engrossed in books or reports. But I felt that the distance went beyond simple physical exhaustion. There was a subtle coldness, less spontaneity, a feeling that her mind was elsewhere, in her academic world, which I did not share in the same way. Every time I felt that distance, I tried to compensate for it. I would buy her small gifts that I knew she liked. I would prepare special dinners when we had a free moment. I would leave her affectionate notes. I wanted to remind her how much I loved her, how proud I was of her, how important our relationship was to me. She appreciated it, always polite, always with a smile, but sometimes I felt that the gratitude was for the gesture itself, not for what it meant for our connection. Despite this growing distance, I trusted her. I knew she was under a lot of pressure with her studies and the research work. I told myself that it was just a temporary phase, that once she graduated and had her career, we would have more time for each other and that connection would return stronger. She would tell me she was exhausted when I asked if something was wrong, and I believed her. After all, why doubt? I loved her, I trusted her implicitly, and I was investing my present in her future, our future. I began to visualize that future in more detail as her graduation approached. I, for my part, had been working tirelessly, gaining experience in construction, making contacts with contractors and other professionals in the industry. I knew that if I got a university degree related to my work, my opportunities and my income would skyrocket. People in my field valued practical experience, but a degree opened doors to bigger projects, to positions of greater responsibility. So I started planning my own university path, hoping to be able to combine work with study, just as she had done. My dream was becoming clearer and more real. I visualized the moment when we would both have our degrees, our careers taking off. We would get married. We would have the wedding we deserved without the financial worries that had held our families back. And then we would start our own family. We would have children. We would give them the stability and opportunities that we did not have. It was a simple dream, but for me it meant building the home and the life I had always longed for. I was on the cusp of achieving it, feeling that all my sacrifices were about to pay off, that our bright future was just around the corner. I could not imagine anything that could derail that path. How wrong I was. Reality was about to hit me with the force of a sledgehammer, shattering not only my dreams, but also my trust in love and in the person to whom I had given the most. I came home that night later than usual. It had been a particularly long and exhausting day at work. Construction often involved extended shifts, and that day we had a problem on the site that kept us all there longer than planned. I was looking forward to getting to our apartment, taking off my work boots, and even if it was just for a little while, disconnecting from the world. When I opened the door, darkness and silence greeted me. Strange. Normally, by that time she would have already arrived from the university or the library if she had to stay and study late. A dim reading light, the soft sound of music or a television show in the background, something. But the apartment was completely silent. I felt a slight pang of concern. I checked the time on my phone. Yes, it was late, but much later than was usual for her. Honey, I called, my voice echoing in the unusual emptiness of the place. There was no answer. I left my backpack at the entrance and walked through the small apartment, checking the rooms. The bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. I was alone. A feeling of unease began to grow in my chest. Maybe she had stayed at a friend's house to study, although she had not told me. That was strange for her. She was usually considerate with schedules, knowing that I would worry if she did not arrive at a reasonable hour. My unease turned into a cold certainty when I entered the bedroom again and opened the closet. A large part of her clothes was gone. The shelves that used to be full of her sweaters and t-shirts were strangely empty. In the bathroom, her personal belongings were not on the shelf we shared. Her travel suitcase, which we kept at the top of the closet, was not in its usual place. A dull panic began to rise in my throat. This was not just her staying out late. This was different. It seemed as if she had left. But why? Where? Without saying anything, I took out my phone. My hands trembled slightly. I dialed her number. It rang and rang. And then voicemail. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. She sent it to voicemail. She did not want to talk to me. The certainty that something terrible was happening hit me hard. I walked aimlessly around the living room, my gaze stumbling upon the familiar objects, the photos of us smiling, building our little nest. Nothing seemed real. It was then that I saw it. On the kitchen table, next to a small vase with dried flowers, was a white envelope with my name written on it by hand. Her handwriting. My heart gave a painful lurch. I knew, even before opening it, that this letter contained the explanation, the reason for her absence, for her missing things, for her unanswered calls. I picked it up with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the paper as if it held the destiny of my future. I opened the envelope and unfolded the sheet. Her words filled the silence of the apartment. She began by saying that it was difficult to write, that she was very sorry to do this to me, especially in this way. Then she went into the explanation. She said that for some time, in recent months, she had felt that our relationship had become monotonous, that the routine, the lack of spark, had gradually pushed her away, that although she loved me and appreciated everything I did for her, the romantic love had been fading. I read those words and could not believe it. Monotony. After everything we were building, the sacrifices I was making, the plans we had, that was all. A simple matter of spark or monotony. I felt a pang of pain and resentment. My effort, my dedication, my unconditional love were worthless. But the letter continued, and what came next was the blow that knocked me down completely. She said that at the university, in her history and archaeology studies, she had met someone, a professor, a man, according to her words, incredibly cultured, intelligent, with whom she could have conversations that challenged and inspired her. Someone who shared her passion for the past, for discoveries, and that over time those conversations, that intellectual connection, had transformed into something more, into feelings, that she had fallen in love with him. The words seemed to explode on the page. She had fallen in love with her professor, a man from the world that I had helped her reach. I felt a pang of betrayal so deep it almost took my breath away. Not only was she leaving me, not only had she supposedly stopped loving me because of monotony, but she was replacing me with someone from her new environment, someone who represented the world I had pushed her towards, but of which I was not a part in the same way. The man who opened her mind in the classrooms now, apparently, had also opened her heart. The letter ended by explaining why she was not facing me. She said she was too afraid of my reaction, that she knew it would hurt me a lot, and, what was worse for her, she felt an immense shame for leaving me like this, especially knowing that I had been the one who had paid for her university, who had made sacrifices so she could follow her dream, that she felt guilty for that, and that is why she did not dare to tell me in person. When I finished reading, the paper slipped from my trembling hands and floated to the floor. I stood there in the middle of the silence of the empty apartment with the words of her letter echoing in my head. The initial shock gave way to a wave of sadness and pain so intense that it doubled me over. I fell to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The tears flowed in torrents, and I felt like I was running out of air. My chest ached as if a knife had been stabbed into it. I could not breathe. Every breath was an agonizing effort. Sadness consumed me completely. A sadness that went beyond a simple breakup. It was the destruction of all my plans, all my sacrifices, all my hopes for a future together, for a family, for a better life. Everything had crumbled in the instant I read those words. She, the person for whom I had worked to the point of exhaustion, the person in whom I had invested my money and my heart, had abandoned me for someone else, claiming monotony, and falling in love with a man from the world that I had financed for her. The cruelty of the situation, the bitter irony of having paid for the education that led her into the arms of another, was tearing me apart inside. I felt like I was suffocating with the pain, that the weight of the betrayal and the broken dreams was too much to bear. In the midst of my desperation, with my vision blurred by tears and my body trembling uncontrollably, I instinctively reached for my phone. I needed someone who knew who I was before this night, someone who could anchor me before I completely sank. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number of my closest friend, the only person I felt I could turn to in that abyss of pain. When he picked up, I could only manage a series of sobs and choked words, trying to explain through my tears that she had gone, that she had left me, that everything was over. And as he tried to comfort me on the other end of the line, I was left breathless, completely shattered, in the apartment that was once our home and was now just a monument to my broken dreams and my shattered heart. The weeks that followed the night I found the letter were a personal hell. My close friend, let us call him David, did everything he could to comfort me. He let me stay on his couch for a few days. He listened to me. He reminded me of my worth. But despite his unconditional support, the pain consumed me. Every morning, waking up was a reminder of the devastating reality. The empty apartment, her absence, the cruelty of the letter, the certainty that I had invested years of my life and my resources in a person who in the end had discarded me for monotony and for another man, was an unbearable weight. I barely ate. I barely slept. Tears were a constant companion. I felt like I was suffocating with sadness, with the feeling of failure and betrayal. All those plans we had made together, that vision of the future that drove me to work to exhaustion, had vanished in an instant. The idea that the money I earned with so much effort, the long hours under the sun, in the cold, all of that had gone to pay for the education that led her into the arms of another man, was a wound that opened up again and again. It felt like the biggest waste of my life, not just of money, but of time, energy, and heart. I was in a spiral of pain from which I saw no way out. Inevitably, my emotional state began to affect my work. Where I was once diligent, attentive to details, and always willing to go the extra mile, I was now distracted. I made silly mistakes, and my productivity plummeted. My bosses noticed. They called me into the office with serious faces. They asked if something was wrong, if I needed to take some time off. I gave them a very diluted version of the truth, something about serious personal problems. They were understanding to a certain extent, but they made it clear that my performance had to improve. That conversation with my bosses was a crucial moment. I looked at myself in the mirror, haggard, gaunt, a shadow of the man I used to be. I realized that if I continued like this, if I let the pain consume me completely, I would also lose my job, the only stable foundation I had left. I had already lost my relationship, my home. Technically, I still had the rent, but it no longer felt like a home without her. My dreams of an immediate family. I could not afford to lose my professional future and my financial security as well. It was a turning point. I decided at that moment that I would not sink completely, that I would not give the pain the satisfaction of destroying me. It was not about forgetting or for the pain to stop. I knew that would take time. It was about compartmentalizing, putting the pain in a box, closing it as best I could, and moving forward with a cold and stoic determination. I had invested a lot in my future, and although the person with whom I had planned it was no longer there, the future itself still existed. The wasted money on her education hurt like hell, but I would not let it hold me back. I would see it as an expensive lesson. I redirected all my energy toward my work. I volunteered for the most difficult projects. I worked overtime voluntarily. I sought to learn new skills in my field. I threw myself into my work to the point of physical exhaustion, using it as a way not to think, not to feel. I actively sought to expand my network of contacts in the industry, knowing that each connection could be an open door in the future. It was no longer just about earning money. It was about building a fortress around myself, something tangible that could not be taken away by betrayal or emotional deception. To better manage my finances and prepare for the next step in my plan, my own university education, I made some difficult decisions. I sold some of the things we had bought together, objects that now only served as painful reminders of a future that would not be. I left the apartment we shared and moved into a much smaller and cheaper one, conveniently located near my work to save on transportation and time. The contrast with the home we had built was depressing, but it was practical. With the money from the sales and the savings on rent, I was able to start paying off a university loan I had taken out, partly to cover her expenses or perhaps to start saving for my own future. Now it was just my responsibility, or simply to have a larger cushion and reduce any outstanding debt. And then I took the big step. I enrolled in university, starting my own path towards the degree I knew would catapult my career. I chose classes that I could balance with my demanding work schedule, and thus began a period of my life of relentless work and study. My days were an exhausting routine. Waking up before dawn, going to work, going to classes, coming home, studying until the early morning, sleeping a few hours, and starting all over again. I worked 4 times as hard as my university classmates who did not have to maintain a full-time job. There was no time for anything else. My social life was reduced to zero. I did not go out. I did not go to parties. I barely saw David from time to time for a quick and necessary coffee. Romantic relationships were completely off the table. Although there were women who showed interest, I simply did not have the emotional capacity or the physical time to consider it. The wound of my ex's betrayal was still fresh, and the idea of trusting someone in that way again was terrifying to me. I had built a wall around myself, dedicating every ounce of my energy to building my future, proof against disappointment and proof against myself. It was a lonely path, dictated by the pain of the past and the determination to build a future in which I depended only on my own effort and my own decisions. I would not allow anything or anyone to have the power to destroy my life in that way again. The months stretched on, in a relentless cycle of work, study, and very little rest. My routine was exhausting, designed to squeeze every productive minute out of the day. I would get up early to go to the construction site or the office. My job had both aspects depending on the project. I would spend the afternoon at the university and the nights I would dedicate to studying in my small apartment. My social life, as I mentioned, had been reduced to the necessary interaction with my work colleagues, my professors, and very occasionally, a quick conversation with David to assure him that I was still alive. I did not see my old friends at all. It was not that I had an active resentment that drove me to actively avoid them all the time, although the disappointment at their lack of support was still there. I simply did not have time. My focus was singular: work, study, build my future. Everything else was a distraction I could not afford. In the midst of this self-imposed isolation, my phone, which rarely rang for anything other than work or my few calls to David, began to receive messages and calls from an unknown number at first, which I later identified. It was from Maria, another generic name, my ex-girlfriend Sarah's best friend. The first messages were cautious, asking how I was, if I was okay, if I had heard anything about myself. I did not respond. Then they became a little more frequent, with an underlying tone of concern. As soon as I saw who it was, I knew immediately that it was not just Maria worrying about an old acquaintance. It was Sarah. It was her way of trying to find out about me without having to face me directly, without having to break the silence she herself had created by leaving. Her best friend was her emissary, her way of testing the waters, of seeing how I was, the man she had abandoned and for whom I had paid for university. I did not feel anger when I realized this. I felt a cold confirmation. Confirmation that, despite everything, something was driving her to know, whether it was guilt, curiosity, or a strange sense of belated responsibility. But I had no interest in her knowing how I was. I did not want her pity. I did not want her to think I was doing badly or well. I did not want her to have any vision of the life I was building through effort on the ruins she had left behind. I firmly decided to ignore all of Maria's calls and messages. I would delete the messages without reading them completely. I would divert the calls. Maintaining that boundary was crucial for my own healing process and to reaffirm that my life no longer revolved around her or her world. This strategy of ignoring worked for several weeks. The messages became less frequent. I thought maybe she had gotten the message. But one day, while I was engrossed in my studies in the apartment, exhausted after a long day, someone knocked on my door. A persistent knock. I frowned. I almost never received unexpected visitors. I opened the door, slightly annoyed by the interruption, and there, standing in the hallway, was Maria. Remember, for more stories like this, subscribe, like, and activate the bell. Let us continue. She was visibly surprised to see me. I guess my appearance reflected the exhaustion of my endless days of work and study. My name, she exclaimed with a mixture of surprise and relief. Why do you not answer my messages? I was worried about you. Are you okay? I looked at her for a second, and in her face I saw not only concern, but also the connection to the past, to Sarah. I felt that this was the moment to cut this tie once and for all, to send a clear message through her. I let her in, closing the door behind her. I went back to the small table where I was studying and sat down, gesturing for her to take a seat in the only extra chair. Maria, I said, my voice tired but firm, with no trace of the anger or pain I used to feel when I thought of Sarah. I know you have been trying to contact me, and I know it is not just you. I know it is Sarah who wants to know how I'm. I looked her directly in the eyes. I have not answered you because I do not have time, and, frankly, I'm not interested either. I continued to explain my situation in a direct way, without seeking sympathy. I'm working, I'm studying. My days are long and exhausting. Every free minute I have, I dedicate to trying to move forward in my life. I do not have time for social media, I do not have time to go out. I do not have time for the past. I was very clear on this last point. Sarah decided to leave my life in a very definitive way, and I have accepted that decision. I have no interest in hearing about her or in her hearing about me. What was meant to be was, things were said and done. Maria tried to argue with a tone that sought to soften the situation. But, my name, she said, you should not be so harsh. Sarah cares about you. She is fond of you. Do you matter to her? Her words sounded empty to me. Fondness, mattering to her, I repeated without sarcasm, just with a coldness of statement. Maria, the person for whom I paid for university, the person with whom I planned my future, left me a letter saying she was bored and left with her professor, without daring to face me because of the shame of what she owed me. That is not fondness, that is something else. And whether I matter to her or not now is completely irrelevant to me. I stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. I appreciate you being concerned, Maria, I said, maintaining a respectful tone despite the firmness of my words. But my life now is this, work and study. I'm on a different path, far from the past. Please, tell Sarah that I'm fine or not fine, whatever she wants to believe, but I do not want any more contact. And you, live your life, move on. I already have. Maria stood there for a second, looking a little stunned by my frankness and my apparent lack of emotion or my ability to hide it. She nodded slowly, seeming to understand that there was nothing more to say, that my decision was firm. Okay, she said in a low voice. I understand. She turned around and left the apartment. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment. I felt a wave of relief. I had cut the last thread that tied me to the past. No more emissaries, no more attempts at contact. I had defended my space, my time, my peace of mind. I sat down again at my study table, looking at the books and notes. The loneliness of the apartment did not feel empty now. It felt like my own. It was my space to rebuild, free from the shadows and complications of the past. The road was hard, yes, but now, finally, I felt that I was walking it completely alone, depending only on myself. And that, after all, was exactly what I needed. The months turned into almost a couple of years of that exhausting routine that I had chosen for myself. Work, study, work, study. The weekends were just an extension of this discipline, dedicated to university projects or extra shifts at my job to cover expenses and continue saving. My social life remained on hold. My friend David was still my only regular contact outside of the work and academic sphere, and our conversations continued to be necessary anchors in the midst of my self-imposed isolation. I did not hear from Maria, my ex's friend, again, which meant that Sarah had not tried to contact me through her again. The past, at least in that respect, had remained silent, allowing me to concentrate all my energy on the present and the future that I was building brick by brick. During all this time, my focus on my studies was total. I did not go to university just to hang out. I went with a purpose. Every class, every assignment, every exam was an opportunity to absorb knowledge that I knew I would apply directly in my career. My years of practical experience in construction gave me an advantage. I could understand theoretical concepts by seeing them applied in the real world. This combination of experience and academic dedication began to make me stand out. My professors, who I suppose were used to students more focused on social life or less committed, began to notice me. They saw that I not only got good grades, but I also participated actively, asked relevant questions, and showed a deep understanding of the subject matter, often relating it to practical situations. It was at the beginning of my final year when one of my main professors, a highly respected figure in my field, let us call him Professor Evans, called me after a class. I thought maybe he wanted to talk about an assignment or recommend an additional course, but what he proposed far exceeded any expectation I could have had. He invited me to join a very important research and development project that he and other professors were working on in collaboration with a company in the sector. It was a cutting-edge project, something that could have a significant impact on our industry. I felt a wave of pure excitement, the kind of enthusiasm I had not felt since before the breakup. It was an incredible opportunity to apply what I was learning at a much higher level, to work side by side with experts in my field, and to make contacts that would be worth gold in my future career. I did not hesitate for a second. I thanked Professor Evans profusely and assured him that I would dedicate myself to the project with all my effort. This was the tangible reward for my sacrifices, the validation that my effort was paying off. Accepting to join the project meant adding another layer of demand to my already saturated routine. Now I had my full-time job, my full-time university studies, and this high-level research project. My schedule became inhuman. I would go from the construction site to the university, from the university to project meetings, and the few hours I had left I would dedicate to studying for my classes or working on the project's deliverables. Sleep became a rare and precious luxury. I often found myself working or studying until the early hours of the morning, waking up a few hours later to start the cycle all over again. Physical exhaustion was constant, a persistent backdrop in my life. There were moments when the fatigue overwhelmed me, when I wondered if all this extreme effort was worth it, but then I would remind myself why I was doing it. I had a clear vision. I knew that the experience I was gaining in this project, combined with my university degree and my practical experience, would make me a highly valued professional in my field. This would open doors to much better paying jobs, to the financial stability I had always sought. The current sacrifice, the lack of sleep, the absence of a personal life were a necessary investment in that future. It was a price I was willing to pay. I was not going to let the betrayal of the past define my destiny. I was going to build my success with my own hands, based on my own merit. Working on the project with the professors was an accelerated learning experience. It exposed me to complex problems, to advanced methodologies, to a way of thinking that elevated my understanding of my field to a new level. I was not just learning, I was contributing in a significant way. My practical experience turned out to be invaluable for the research team, helping to bridge the gap between theory and real application. The professors valued my perspective, my work ethic, and my dedication. I was building not only experience, but a solid reputation among people who mattered in my industry. And although I did not know it at the time, this project and the connections I was forging would be the springboard that would take me much further than I had ever imagined, paving the way for the kind of financial and professional success I had dreamed of and beyond. Graduation was approaching, and with it the promise that this period of titanic effort was about to take a transformative turn. The years passed, a relentless cycle of work, study, projects, and very little sleep. My life had become a constant marathon, but the end was in sight. Graduation, the moment for which I had worked tirelessly since I decided to invest in myself after my world fell apart. The anticipation was mixed with a deep exhaustion, but the idea of crossing that finish line pushed me to keep going. Graduation day arrived. It was a crowded event for most, full of proud families, friends celebrating. For me, it was a little different. My parents, as was usual in my life, were not present. They were never an active part of my academic or professional achievements. The only people in the stands, waiting for me with genuine smiles and enthusiastic applause when my name was called, were David, my faithful friend, who had been there in my worst moments, and Professor Evans, along with two other professors who had been key to the project, who were now my partners. It was a small group, yes, but their presence meant more to me than a stadium full of faces I barely knew. Their support, their faith in me, was all I needed. Upon receiving my diploma, I felt a wave of pride that completely filled me. Not for the piece of paper itself, but for what it represented. Years of sacrifice, of overcoming despair, of building something solid from nothing. I had achieved it solely through my own effort and the timely help of a few. After the ceremony, Professor Evans and my other partners approached, their faces beaming with pride, even more so than mine. They congratulated me effusively on my graduation and, above all, on my exceptional work on the project. And then they gave me the news that would transform my future overnight. The project we had been working on tirelessly, the one that had cost me countless hours of sleep, had been a resounding success, not only at a research level, but commercially. They had secured significant funding and, as a result, the project had officially become a company, a real company with the potential for massive growth in our industry. And my role in that company far exceeded anything I could have anticipated when I joined the project. They offered me to be the head of a key area, an area that I had helped develop with my practical experience and my vision. But not only that, in recognition of my fundamental contributions and my work ethic, They offered me to become a partner in the company, an owner. And to complete the picture, they invited me to join the board of directors. I went from being a part-time student with a full-time job and an uncertain future to being a partner, a boss, and a board member of a promising new company in my field. They told me to take a week to rest, to let it all sink in, and then we would sit down to formally negotiate my contract, my salary as head of the area, and, crucially, my percentage of profits as a partner. They gave me an estimate of what that would represent in terms of annual income, and the figure was astronomical, something I never thought I would earn in my entire life, let alone at my age. I was stunned, dizzy. The financial security I had always sought, for which I had worked tirelessly, was not only within reach, it had become an overwhelming and wonderful reality. I felt immense gratitude for the professors who had believed in me and given me this opportunity, and a deep pride in myself for having persevered. All the sacrifices, all the pain, all the wasted money in the past, at this moment, everything seemed justified by this incredible reward. That night we had a celebration dinner with David, Professor Evans, and the other partners. We toasted to the company, to the future, and to my graduation. I felt surrounded by people who valued my effort and my potential, a feeling that contrasted sharply with the lack of support I had experienced years before. I returned to my small, modest apartment that night with my head full of amazing figures and exciting plans. Despite the magnitude of my imminent success, my home was still that functional and uninspiring space I had chosen out of economic necessity and practicality. When I got to the door, as I was looking for my keys, I noticed a figure sitting on the steps in the hallway. At first, in the dim light, I did not recognize her, but as I got closer, my heart stopped. The air froze in my lungs. It was her, my ex-girlfriend, the woman who had abandoned me with a letter after I paid for her university. Seeing her there, on the steps of my humble apartment, after years of absolute silence, was like receiving a physical blow. The trauma of the past, the pain of the betrayal, the panic of that night when I found her letter, all resurfaced at once. I felt my chest tighten, the air not coming. A fight-or-flight response was activated within me. I tried to control myself, to breathe, to process the unreality of the situation. She saw me. She stood up. She had an expression on her face that I had never seen on her before, a mixture of sadness, regret, and hope. She started to approach me with her eyes full of tears, and then I noticed something else. She was not alone. By her side, standing, clinging to her leg, was a small child, a child of a few years. Her son. The surprise of seeing the child added to the shock of seeing her. The situation was so strange, so unexpected, that my instinctive reaction of panic was mixed with an overwhelming confusion. Sarah continued to approach, crying openly now. "Oh, my name," she sobbed, reaching her hands out to me. "I'm so sorry. I had to see you. I needed to talk to you." She tried to hug me, but my body reacted before my mind could fully process it. I took a step back, pushing away her attempt at a hug. I raised a hand to stop her. "Stay away, Sarah," I said, my voice sounding tense and controlled, with the same coldness I used when I asked her friend Maria to leave me alone years ago. But the presence of the child, looking at me with curiosity, made me hesitate. I could not just shut the door in her face with the child there. Despite my trauma and my desire for her to disappear, I felt a strange obligation to understand and, maybe, just maybe, to listen to what she had to say after all this time. I pointed to the apartment door. "Come in," I said, my voice still tense, "but do not come near." The final confrontation, the one that would close this painful chapter forever, was about to begin, bringing with it unexpected truths and the weight of the past manifested in the figure of a child. I looked at her, standing there in the living room of my small apartment that I would soon be leaving, with a child who turned out to be hers, crying and asking for a way back into my life. The presence of the child, oblivious to the emotional storm raging around him, was what kept me anchored. I let him pass. The child, exhausted, fell asleep in a chair shortly after, lulled by the strange silence that filled the room. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where years ago I had found her letter. The irony was almost unbearable. The silence hung between us, heavy with the weight of the past, of unsaid words, of broken dreams. She broke the silence. the tears flowing freely down her face. "I'm so sorry, my name," she began, her voice breaking with each word. "I'm sorry for leaving you like that. I'm sorry for the letter. I'm sorry for all the pain I caused you." I nodded, without speaking, urging her with my silence to continue. She told me her story. How yes, at university she met that professor. She spoke of his charisma, his brilliant intellect, how he made her feel understood and challenged in a way that, according to her, I no longer did. A pang of pain for my sacrifices resurfaced, but I contained it. She fell in love with him, with the idea of the world he represented, with the passionate conversations. And he, she told me, manipulated her. He promised her a life of adventures, exciting archaeological projects in exotic places, a life far from the monotony she felt by my side. He convinced her that the best way to leave was quickly, without a painful confrontation, that a letter would be less damaging. And so, driven by her infatuation and his manipulation, and the shame of having used me while I paid her way, she left me the letter and went with him to Australia with the promise of a project and a brilliant future together. I listened to her with a surprising calm. The confirmation of the professor's manipulation did not surprise me. Guys like that exist. What hurt me was that she, an intelligent woman, had been so gullible, so willing to throw away a solid relationship for a fantasy and the promise of adventure, and that I had been the collateral victim of her selfish quest and his manipulation. But the story of Australia was not a fairy tale. She told me, her voice growing more bitter, that the reality of the professor and the project were not what they seemed. The project did not turn out to be so significant, and he was not the man she thought he was. Soon, she told me, she realized that he had other relationships, that he was not monogamous, and that he had not even been honest with her about it. When she tried to talk to him about her discomfort, about her desire for a committed relationship, he dismissed her coldly. He told her. She recounted with tears of humiliation. What did she expect? That she was just a student to whom he had given an opportunity, that she should not complain, and that just as he had taken her, he could discard her at any moment if she did not conform to his rules. She lived in that situation for a while, trapped in a faraway place with a man who treated her as disposable, far from her previous life. She told me that in her frustration and loneliness, she had tried to contact me through Maria, wanting to know about me, perhaps regretting her decision. But upon receiving no response, she assumed that I wanted nothing to do with her, and she resigned herself. The next part of her story was about the child sleeping in the chair. She discovered she was pregnant. The professor's reaction was one of panic and absolute rejection. He told her he was not going to be responsible for that child, that he was already older and did not want children. Despite her pleas and arguments, he was firm. He gave her a considerable amount of money and disappeared from her life, leaving her alone and pregnant in a foreign country. She gave birth, tried to get by with the money he left her, but raising a child alone, without support, in an unknown place, was incredibly difficult. The expenses quickly exceeded the money she had. Finally, after a while, she saved enough for a return ticket. She returned to the United States without a place to go other than, I suppose, her parents' house. I listened to all of this, my mind processing the twists and turns of her fate. I did not feel joy at her suffering, only a strange confirmation that actions have consequences. When she finished speaking, silence returned to the table. Then, with a new wave of tears and a voice full of, I suppose, belated regret and a hope born of desperation, she reached her hands out to me. "And now," she said, trying to take mine, "I know you have achieved incredible things. I have heard, I have seen a little. You are successful. I love you. My name, I always loved you deep down. And now we can have that family you always wanted. We can build our life together." It was astonishing. After destroying my life, abandoning me for an adventure that went wrong, treating me like something disposable, she was now back upon hearing that I was doing well, wanting to claim the future that I had built alone on the ruins she had left. The coldness of her proposal, though wrapped in tears and words of love, made me pull my hands back abruptly. I felt an icy calm descend over me. It was time to speak my truth, not to hurt her as she had hurt me, but to bring a definitive closure. I looked into her eyes without anger, only with a deep and weary disappointment. "Sarah," I said, my voice low, "I have heard your story, and I'm sorry, I'm sorry that your path was not what you expected. I paused. But when you left, you did not just take your things. You took all the plans we had made, all the hopes I had for us. I told her about the family I wanted to build, about the secure life I imagined, about how my effort was directed towards that goal with her. And you threw it all away for an adventure and the empty promise of some guy. She tried to interrupt, crying harder, apologizing again, but I continued to speak with a determination that came from years of lonely struggle. It does not matter anymore, Sarah. Your apologies, your belated regret, do not change what happened. They do not undo the pain. They do not rebuild the years I spent picking up the pieces and building my life anew. I looked at her, and at that moment I saw with total clarity the path I had traveled alone. I realized something very important when I was at the bottom, alone, working and studying to the point of exhaustion. I realized that the only person I needed to achieve my goals was myself, that I could build my own life, my own success, depending solely on my own effort and my own determination. I pointed towards the door, my voice firm. I'm sorry for the situation you are in, and I'm sorry for the child, but he has a father who, however irresponsible he may be, is his father, and I'm not him. I cannot be responsible. I took out my wallet. I gave her a considerable amount of money. This is to help you get to your parents' house, so you can start over there. I stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. But this is all, Sarah. This is over. You left my life a long time ago, and I do not want you to be a part of it again. Ever. She stood up too, the tears streaming down her face, reaching out her hands again, begging desperately, please, my name, please, forgive me. We can be a family. You are successful now. We can have the life you dreamed of. I love you. We can try again. Her pleas echoed in the small apartment, but I remained motionless, impassive in the face of her tears, recognizing the desperation of the situation, but also the underlying interest in her voice. She wanted the life I had built, not necessarily me. I did not respond. I did not yield. I simply maintained my posture, my firm gaze, until she finally understood that my decision was unshakable. She picked up her sleeping son and, between sobs, left the apartment. I closed the door behind her, and a deep and, this time, complete and healing silence enveloped me. I was left alone in the apartment, feeling the weight of all the years of struggle, of pain, of sacrifice. And at that moment I realized that finally I had closed that cycle. I had faced the past, the person who had caused me so much harm, and I had reacted not from the anger or desperation of before, but from the strength and clarity I had gained. I had proven, both to her and to myself, that her betrayal had not destroyed me. Now my life was in an incredible place. I had a promising career, a partnership in a growing company, a financial security that surpassed my wildest dreams. And yes, I was getting to know that woman from my industry, intelligent, funny, who had also made it on her own. Our conversations were stimulating, our connection genuine, life was moving on. Over time I found out, through casual channels, that Sarah was living with her parents and working a job that barely allowed her to get by. I felt neither rejoicing nor deep pity, just one more confirmation of the reality I had expressed that night. Actions have consequences. Each person decides their own destiny through the decisions they make. She made hers, seeking adventure and easy glamour, and I made mine, choosing perseverance and solitary construction. In the end, we both reaped what we sowed, and I, finally free from the weight of the past, was ready to fully enjoy the life it had cost me so much to build, knowing that things, despite everything, really did get better.